So um, I, what we get is a gradual development of once we have permanent armies. So this is something the Austrians, again, because they have the largest force, because they have this permanent threat from the Turks, they're the ones that create the first proper permanent units. So they've got 20,000, 30,000 troops that they can call on around 1600. The others, they only have a few hundred or so at the most, and then they rely on militia and men that they can recruit to form units when a war starts. So once you have permanent units, you then begin to get traditions building up, practices, and so on. And there are certain things that European armies have shared in common, and then there are others which are more distinctive. So by the time we get to the 19th century, we got distinct traditions in military music, distinct traditions in the way that officers and men interact, and so on. The Habsburg army was always a kind of multilingual, multicultural one. We tend to think of them as not being terribly efficient, but to be an officer in the Habsburg army, you normally had to speak at least one other language, so Hungarian or Italian or Croatian or Czech or all the other languages of the empire in order to talk to the soldiers. There was a separate kind of army German that developed as a kind of basic German that anyone from the empire could understand. So it has those kind of characteristics that come from its own general character as this sort of multinational, multi-ethnic empire.
Let's then mention Switzerland, famously neutral, but that wasn't always the case. What are kind of the defining characteristics when it comes to Switzerland?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, that this idea of the Swiss neutrality, and they must be very peaceful and so on. I mean, they fight numerous wars against each other and outsiders, and it's an aggressive power basically in the late 15th, early 16th century, and so they expand over the Alps southwards into Italy. So that's when the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland is essentially conquered and remains in an inferior status until the Napoleonic era, when they're given equal rights. There's various other bits that they conquered from the nobles that they basically kick out, and so these areas in Switzerland lack rights too. So it's a very hierarchical society, and it's very fractious as well. It's the spread of the Reformation. So early 16th century introduces conflicts between the Protestants and the Catholics, and these repeat into the early 18th century episodically. But gradually, there's essentially a kind of balance where no one really gains the upper hand, and they end up with this sort of uneasy sort of balance where they know that if they do this too much, if they disturb the balance, then they become vulnerable to outsiders. And so a lot of the neutrality is about trying to balance the internal pressures with also balancing the relations of this confederation as a whole and its integral element parts with other powers, because the cantons are supplying soldiers to foreign powers, which is a major source of income for the cantonal elites.